Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're heading down to the US-Mexico border back to the spring break scene of the late 1980s. Picture it, college kids letting loose, crossing into Matamoros for cheap beer and a good time. It's a world of music, parties, and the kind of careless fun that feels like it will last forever. But while the party was raging on one side of town, something else was happening on the other side. Something ancient and evil. On an isolated ranch known as the Devil's Ranch, a charismatic cult leader was promising his followers everything they could ever want: wealth, power, and even magical protection from the law. The price? Blood. And the more innocent the blood, the more powerful the magic. And the investigation would reveal that the very heart of their power, a bubbling cauldron of black magic, was being fed with the boiled brains of their human victims. As you can imagine, this case comes with a massive warning. We are going to be discussing some sick and twisted things today. This is the story of a group of people who fell under the spell of a man they called El Padrino, the Godfather, a man who blended ancient rituals with modern greed to create a horrifying murder machine. Their story would culminate in the frantic search for a missing American student, an investigation that would pry open a door to a hell on earth that no one knew existed. And the most terrifying part? The cult leader promised his followers they'd be invincible to the police. And for a while, it seemed like he was right. This isn't just a story about a serial killer. It's a story about the terrifying power of belief, the dark alliance between crime and the occult, and how the disappearance of one young man exposed a reign of terror that had claimed dozens of victims before him. If you are as fascinated with the hidden world of true crime as I am, then you've definitely found the right place, guys. To join our amazing community and get new videos every single week, please subscribe now. Hit that subscribe button, and hitting that like button too would greatly help the channel grow and allow more people to hear these important stories. Sharing is also encouraged, as even the smallest bit of information could be crucial. And if you want to become a more active part of this community, I'd love for you to consider becoming a channel member. You will not only help sustain the channel, but you also get instant access to our private Discord server. So that's where the conversation really continues. We can chat every day if you like and have in-depth discussions about the cases I cover, share theories, and honestly just chat about what's going on. It's a fantastic community of like-minded people, and I'm there every single day if you want to chat. So if that sounds like your kind of place, you can click the join button below this video. All right, get comfortable, grab a drink. We need to talk about Adolfo Constanzo and the Narco Satanists. The story of this cult is so deeply entwined with its leader that you can't understand one without the other. This wasn't a group that simply went off the rails. It was designed from the ground up by one man, Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo. Adolfo was born in Miami, Florida on November 1st, 1962, All Saints Day, a detail he would later use to bolster his own mystical image. His mother, Delia Aurora Gonzalez del Valle, was just a 15-year-old Cuban immigrant. From the very beginning, Adolfo's life was steeped in the supernatural. Delia was a devout practitioner of Santeria, an Afro-Caribbean religion, but her beliefs went deeper into the darker, more feared practices of Palo Mayombe. Now, it's really important to make a distinction here. Palo Mayombe, which has its roots in the Congo, has always been associated with the black arts, but it isn't inherently evil. It works with spirits of the dead and natural forces. Santeria focuses on the worship of orishas, like gods or goddesses, while Palo Mayombe focuses on the spirits of the dead. But like many belief systems, it has a dualistic nature, two opposing sides. There are branches for healing and good, and then there are branches for aggressive, harmful magic. Delia was said to be a practitioner of this darker side, a palera. It comes down to the palero or palera on how they choose to use this power, for good or for evil. And Delia didn't just practice this around her son. She immersed him in it. She truly believed he was special, a chosen one. Family members and neighbors would later share stories about how Delia would boast about Adolfo's supposed psychic gifts, claiming he predicted the assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan. So imagine growing up with that constant reinforcement, and praise. You're not just a regular boy, you're a prophet. You are told you have immense power. Combined with a really unstable family life, moving between Miami and Puerto Rico, a string of different stepfathers, it's like the perfect recipe for creating a narcissist. Adolfo became his mother's apprentice, learning the rituals, the incantations, the animal sacrifices. But his education in darkness didn't stop there. As a teenager, he was also getting an education in crime. He was arrested multiple times for shoplifting. He wasn't physically a big guy, but he was kind of developing a different kind of power. People who knew him then described him as incredibly handsome, charismatic, with this intense, captivating gaze. And looking at photos of him, you can see this is true. He was also openly bisexual and used his sexuality as a tool, a way to manipulate and control both men and women, drawing them into his world. The real turning point came when he was apprenticed to a Haitian Houngan, a voodoo priest who was also a palero. This mentor allegedly specialized in providing sorcery for criminals. He taught Adolfo that with the right rituals, he could make his clients invisible to the police, invincible to bullets. This is where Adolfo went from folk magic to a more sinister, structured application of his beliefs. He learned about the central and most important tool of a palero, the naganga. The naganga is a sacred cauldron. It's the palero's connection to the spirit world. It's considered a microcosm of the universe, and it houses a powerful spirit, a nefumbe, the spirit of the dead, which is bound to the palero and does his bidding. So Adolfo was taught that the power of the naganga was directly tied to the power of the ingredients you fed it. And the ultimate offering, the most potent ingredient, was human life, particularly human remains like the brain. So let's take a second to think about that. At a young age, Adolfo was taught that murder was a path to power. In 1983, at 21 years old, Adolfo moved to Mexico City. He was partly escaping some of his troubles from the law in Miami, but more importantly, he saw a business opportunity. Mexico City was a massive untapped market. It had the wealthy elite, a powerful criminal underworld, and people with a deep-seated cultural belief in folk magic and spiritualism. It was the perfect place for a charismatic, sociopathic sorcerer to set up shop. And that's exactly what he did. He started as a fortune teller, a spiritual healer, doing card readings and cleansings. His charm, his exotic background, and his absolute confidence in his own power were incredibly effective. Word of El Padrino, the powerful sorcerer, began to spread. And it was in this environment that he would assemble the flock that would become his death cult. Adolfo didn't just offer services, he offered a whole new reality with himself as this godlike figure at the center. And people were drawn to him from all walks of life, all hungry for what he promised: power, wealth, and spiritual protection. His inner circle was a bizarre mix of people. You had guys like Martin Rodriguez, who was a former police officer who became one of Adolfo's lovers and most devoted followers. You had Omar Ochoa, another young, impressionable man who became a trusted lieutenant. And then there was Alvaro de Leon Valdez, known as El Dubi. This guy was the muscle. He was a violent individual with a pre-existing sadistic streak who found an outlet and a justification for his violence within the cult. But the cult's most critical connection, their ticket to the big leagues of organized crime, came through the Hernandez brothers. This was a powerful drug trafficking family operating out of Matamoros. They hired Adolfo for protección, magical protection, and they genuinely believed his rituals shielded their drug shipments from the US and the Mexican authorities. And when their drug runs were successful, it was just more proof of El Padrino's power. How powerful the mind can be, hey? In return, they gave the cult money, weapons, and a base of operations near the border, Rancho Santa Elena. Remember that name. But perhaps the most infamous and perplexing member was Sara Maria Aldrete Villarreal. On the surface, she was this all-American girl. She was tall, striking, intelligent, an honor student, and a cheerleader at Texas Southmost College. She was known as La Madrina, the godmother. She was Adolfo's high priestess and his bridge to a different world, the educated middle-class American world. She was the cult's public relations face, you could say. And when I was researching this case, I was just blown away by how many people were involved and how quickly, I guess, this empire was built. Sarah's role has been debated for decades. Sarah has always maintained that she was another victim, a captive, who was brainwashed and forced to participate. But prosecutors and other cult members painted a very different picture, describing her as a very willing, enthusiastic leader who recruited new members and was deeply involved in the cult's operations. Her charisma and intelligence made her incredibly effective, a powerful and respectable looking symbol for a group engaged in the darkest possible acts. With his flock assembled, Adolfo's twisted ideology became their reality. It was a syncretic nightmare, a mix of Palo Mayombe, Santeria, and even Aztec sacrificial concepts, all filtered through his own malignant narcissism. At the center of it all was his Nganga, which he named Kadiem Pembe. Forensic evidence and testimony from cult members would later reveal what was in that cauldron. It was a horrific stew of graveyard dirt, sticks, coins, herbs, and animal remains, goats, chickens, snakes, and even zebras. And most importantly, human body parts, spinal columns, hearts, testicles, and brains. And at first, when looking into these cauldrons, they don't seem that big. So I don't know if he had a bigger one or if it was in fact a literal stew of these horrific ingredients just mushed into that little cauldron. Adolfo taught them that the spirit in the cauldron fed on life force and blood. The bigger the sacrifice, the stronger the magic. This created a terrifying self-perpetuating cycle of violence. When a drug shipment got through safely, it proved the magic worked, which demanded another bigger sacrifice to maintain the power. It even escalated to ritualistic cannibalism. Reports revealed that small pieces of a victim's brain or heart would be boiled into a brew, a caldo, and drunk by the followers. Pieces of the spinal column were made into necklaces. This was the ultimate act of control, not just making them witness a murder, not just making them participate, but making them consume the victim, wear them. It was a shared, unspeakable transgression that bound them to Adolfo and to each other forever. The cult's activities escalated from these ritual killings of rivals to a full-blown reign of terror. Between 1987 and 1989, it's believed they murdered at least 24 people. The exact number is unknown because many victims were chosen from the transient populations of Mexico City and the border regions, so people whose disappearances would barely register with law enforcement. Basically, people who wouldn't be missed. The murders were methodical, ritualistic. Victims were abducted and taken to one of the cult's properties, most often the now infamous Rancho Santa Elena. There, they were tortured for hours, sometimes days. According to confessions, this torture was meant to purify the victim's soul, which supposedly increased the spiritual energy released upon death. They were often dismembered while still alive. The final act was a machete blow to the back of the neck or a shot from a consecrated bullet. Come on, really? These sick acts would purify the soul? Okay. Adolfo would then personally harvest the organs he needed for the Nganga. The victims included rival drug traffickers whose deaths served as both a sacrifice and as a warning. At least one victim was a transgender chosen because Adolfo believed their spirit would be useful for a specific kind of magic. Another, terrifyingly, was a former cult member who tried to leave. He was hunted down, tortured, and sacrificed as a brutal message to the others. There was no way out. Because these killings were happening in the chaotic, violent world of the border drug trade, they went largely uninvestigated. Local police just dismissed them as standard cartel violence. This reminded me of shows like Breaking Bad and Mayans, because when I was watching them, I was like, is this reality? Because why don't these murders ever get looked into? But I guess this makes sense because the police probably don't waste their resources on cartel violence because it's bad guys killing bad guys. But is this right? Probably not. This lack of scrutiny and checks and balances made Adolfo feel completely untouchable. It's not that he was just falling under the radar. His confidence and his bloodlust grew and grew, unchecked. By early 1989, he had become increasingly paranoid and obsessive about gaining more power. Like, how much do you want, bro? He believed his powers were limitless, but he also believed that to maintain and grow that power, the Nganga needed a more potent sacrifice than ever before. He told his followers they needed a superior brain, specifically the brain of an intelligent, English-speaking American college student. He reasoned that the victim's intellect would grant the cult a higher level of magical protection and strategic cunning. I mean, can you believe this sheer audacity? But he made a catastrophic miscalculation. For all his supposed psychic power, Adolfo could not foresee the firestorm he was about to unleash. Unlike his previous victims, like cartel members, the disappearance of an American citizen on spring break would trigger a massive international law enforcement response that no amount of black magic could stop. And that brings us to Mark Kilroy. This part of the case rung such a bell with me, and then I realized this part of the case I heard about years ago, and it absolutely terrified me. Mark was a 21-year-old pre-med student at the University of Texas in Austin, and he was smart, athletic, and he came from a pretty well-respected family. In March 1989, he was doing what thousands of other students were doing. He was on spring break in South Padre Island, Texas, and planned to cross the border with 3 friends, Bradley, Bill, and Brent, to hit the bars in Matamoros, Mexico. This was something a lot of spring breakers did because the booze was significantly cheaper in Matamoros and the vibe was way better. The 4 of them had been close for most of their lives, and they had planned this trip knowing it might be their last trip together before graduation led them into their new lives. The scene of sun, sex, and alcohol in South Padre Island was far from Mark's norm. He was kind of shy, very responsible, and anti-drugs. After spending the first night in South Padre Island, the group of 4 friends set out to Matamoros the next day, a town Mark had been to the year prior. They visited the tourist trap shops and plethora of cheap bars before sleepily returning back to the Sheraton Hotel in South Padre Island. On Monday, March 13th, 1989, the 3rd day of their vacation, the boys relaxed on the beach before deciding to return to Matamoros that night for another round of late-night fun. They parked on the border in Brownsville, Texas, and walked across the International Bridge, ready to meet thousands of other spring breakers jammed inside the bars and clubs in Matamoros. In the early hours of the morning, as the bars were closing, Mark and his friends began walking towards the border at 2:30 a.m., and they got separated from each other. Apparently, the friend that was walking with Mark stepped aside to pee, and when he returned, Mark was gone. His friends waited and searched around, checked the car, but Mark vanished. The next morning, they reported him missing to the police in Texas. He was last seen outside a popular nightclub, seemingly looking for his friends so they could head back across the border together. He was alone, and he was exactly what the cult was looking for. According to later confessions, cult members who had been actively hunting for a victim spotted Mark. Believing he was the perfect target, they snatched him off the street. A cult member acting like a police officer told Mark he was under arrest and forced him into their vehicle. He was driven to Rancho Santa Elena, about 20 miles outside of the city. I can't even imagine what Mark was going through or what he was thinking at the time. For the next 12 hours, Mark was held captive and subjected to unimaginable horror. He was beaten and sodomized. He was kept in a dark shack, forced to listen to the sounds of the cult's rituals. Then, with Adolfo in charge, the final sacrifice was performed. Mark was led out to a clearing. A wire was tied around his neck, and he was hanged. As he was dying, Adolfo took a machete and sliced open the back of his skull, removing his brain. His legs were also severed below the knees. His brain was then boiled in the Nganga. His mutilated body was buried in a shallow grave on the ranch alongside the cult's other victims. I mean, if that's not sick, that's probably one of the sickest things we've ever talked about on this channel. The disappearance of Mark was not just another missing persons case. The Kilroy family was well connected and politically influential. Mark's uncle was a US customs agent. They immediately launched a high-profile public campaign to find their son, plastering his face on posters and news broadcasts on both sides of the border. This put immense pressure on both the US and Mexican authorities to act and act fast. What began as a local case quickly exploded into a major international incident. The US Customs Service, the DEA, the FBI, they all joined forces with the Mexican federal and state police. A $15,000 reward was offered for information, but for weeks, there were no leads. The investigation stalled, focusing on the usual dangers of the border, like robbery and kidnapping for ransom. Meanwhile, Adolfo and his followers, believing their magic had just made them invisible, just continued their daily activities like nothing was going on. And their arrogance would be their undoing. Nearly a month after Mark's disappearance, on April 9th, 1989, a cult member named Serafin Hernandez Jr., a member of the drug trafficking Hernandez family, was driving a truck near the ranch. He came to a routine Mexican federal police checkpoint, and instead of stopping, he just drove right through it, brazenly ignoring the police. Why? Because he truly believed Adolfo's magic made him untouchable. It was the dumbest, most arrogant mistake they could have made. That act of defiance put him squarely on the police's radar. The police tracked the vehicle from the checkpoint incident, and it led them right to Rancho Santa Elena. So they set up surveillance. When they saw the same vehicle, they moved in. The cult members, still high on their own magical bullshit, opened fire on the police, confident that their magical shields would protect them. In the shootout that followed, I believe Serafin was killed. The other cult members that were present, their belief in their own invincibility instantly shattered when they were quickly arrested. And under interrogation, the wall of silence crumbled. The arrested members, including Serafin's gangster boss uncle, Elio Hernandez Rivera, quickly broke. They confessed everything. They told the horrified investigators about a satanic cult led by Adolfo and Sara. They admitted to drug trafficking, to multiple murders, and most critically, they led the police to the ranch's burial ground. Now, when they first began searching the ranch, they found over 30 kilos of marijuana. And then officers stumbled upon the shed. To an American cop's eyes, it looked like an ordinary shed with melted candles, cigar butts, empty bottles, etc. But the Mexican cops saw something else. They saw a devil's temple and knew black magic was practiced here. The commanding officer, Juan Ayala, made the search come to a halt and insisted that nothing proceed until the black magic was neutralized. So a curandero was summoned to the ranch to cast out the demons. On April 11, 1989, investigators began to dig. The first body they found was Mark Kilroy's. He was identified by the unique mutilations the captured followers had described, the missing brain and the severed legs. Over the next several days, they exhumed 14 more bodies, all in various states of decomposition, all showing signs of horrific ritual torture. In a shed on the property, they found the gruesome centerpiece of the whole operation, the blood and organ-caked nganga. The iron cauldron was filled with boiled human remains, animal parts, and other ritual items. The site was immediately dubbed the Devil's Ranch by the press. The story of the narco satanists exploded into front page news worldwide. Media outlets chartered planes to the ranch. Oprah Winfrey was on the phone, ready to interview people. It was just such a wild story, and it was hard to even believe. The discoveries at the ranch sparked one of the largest manhunts in modern Mexican history. Adolfo, Sara, and the remaining inner circle, Martin Quintana, Omar Ochoa, and El Dubi de Leon, were now the most wanted fugitives in the country. They fled Matamoros and went into hiding in Mexico City, but the pressure was mounting and the cult was fracturing. The captured members were giving detailed confessions, painting a chilling picture of El Padrino's cruelty and control. Sara was initially considered a prime suspect and a co-leader of the cult, but on April 17th, she was arrested after she casually walked right into the arms of police at Mexico City Airport. She claimed she was an innocent victim who had been held against her will, but her claims were completely contradicted by testimony of the other cult members who all portrayed her as a willing and even enthusiastic participant of the sick shit that was happening at this ranch. For weeks, Adolfo and his final 3 loyal followers, Martin, Omar, and El Dubi, managed to evade capture, moving between safe houses. But their time was running out, and on May 6, 1989, police acting on a tip from a neighbor about a strange argument surrounded a nondescript apartment building in Mexico City. Inside one of those apartments were the last of the Narco Satanists. Realizing they were cornered with no escape, Adolfo panicked. He started firing an automatic weapon out the window at the police. But he knew it was over. His magic had failed. His empire of blood had crumbled. And true to his maniacal nature, terrified of being captured alive and tortured by the police, he decided to write his own end. He handed a machine gun to his most loyal executioner, El Dubi, and gave him one final order: to kill him and Martin. El Dubi, the loyal follower to the very end, obeyed. He opened fire, killing Adolfo and Martin as they huddled together in a closet. A few moments later, a distraught Omar opened the apartment door and surrendered to the police. Inside, they found the bodies of El Padrino, Adolfo, and his lieutenant, Martin. The bloody saga had finally come to a violent end. The death of Adolfo and some of his crew wasn't the end of the story. The legal and cultural fallout from this case would linger for decades. The surviving members of the cult had to face justice in the Mexican legal system. Sara Aldrete, La Madrina, despite her persistent claims of being this innocent victim, was convicted of multiple counts of murder in 1990 and sentenced to 62 years in prison. Her sentence has been modified over the years, but as of 2023, which is when I could last find any update, she remains incarcerated in Mexico. Her case is still pretty controversial, and a recent documentary re-examined her claims of being a victim of coercion. So let's see how that pans out. Alvaro El Dubi de Leon, the executioner, was sentenced to 30 years in prison. And the other dozen or so members of the cult, including those from the Hernandez family, received pretty lengthy sentences, some up to 65 years in prison for their roles in the murders and the drug trafficking. The Adolfo Constanzo case had a devastating impact on the public perception of Afro-Caribbean religions. The media's sensationalist narco-satanist label unfairly conflated Adolfo's twisted, sadistic, self-serving ideology with legitimate religions like Santeria and Palo Mayombe. For years, legitimate practitioners who numbered in the millions worldwide were stigmatized and forced to defend their faith against accusations of devil worship and human sacrifice. It's so important to remember that what Adolfo created was a monstrous aberration, a perversion that he stole and twisted for his own evil needs and wants. From a psychological perspective, Adolfo was a complex storm of pathologies. A modern profile would likely diagnose him with a severe combination of disorders. He had malignant narcissism, which is characterized by extreme narcissism, antisocial behavior, paranoia, and sadism. He had a grandiose sense of self-importance, a complete lack of empathy, a paranoid worldview, and he clearly took sadistic pleasure in inflicting pain on others. He also classically fit the profile for antisocial personality disorder, with his long history of criminality, manipulation, and utter disregard for the rights and safety of others. And he had all the skills of a classic cult leader like Charles Manson or Jim Jones. He preyed on the psychological needs of his followers, their greed, their insecurity, their desire for power, and created this high control group where his word was absolute law. He used classic brainwashing techniques, isolation, indoctrination, and binding his followers to him through these horrific shared criminal acts. It's hard to imagine that literally how he was raised and praised turned him into this. Did it? Or was this always inside him? You look at a little baby growing into a small child and they don't naturally possess these traits. So it's wild to think that we as humans can turn other humans into something inhumane. What could have been done differently? It's the question that haunts every one of these cases. Perhaps if the initial disappearances of Mexican citizens, the prostitutes, the small-time drug dealers had been investigated with the same urgency as that of an American student, the cult's killing spree could have been stopped much sooner. This case is a stark and painful reminder of how victim demographics can tragically influence law enforcement priorities. For the families of the victims, the aftermath is a lifetime of pain. But for the Kilroy family in particular, they channeled their unimaginable grief into positive action. They established the Mark Kilroy Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to drug education and awareness, hoping to prevent other families from suffering a similar fate. The case of Adolfo Constanzo remains one of the most disturbing chapters in the archives of modern crime. He was a master manipulator who twisted faith into a personal engine for greed and slaughter. The discovery of that mass grave at Rancho Santa Elena forced the world to confront a terrifying reality: that monsters are real. And sometimes they walk among us, cloaked in charisma, promising salvation, while leading their followers down a path to damnation. The legacy of the narco satanists is a permanent grim reminder of the darkness that can fester when superstition, criminality, and unchecked evil converge. So what do you guys think about this case? The psychology of how one man could exert so much control is just mind-blowing and terrifying. His mom, Delia, terrifies me also. She created this. Then the fact that he didn't face any punishment for the crimes he committed. Some say that death is the ultimate punishment, but I don't know. To me, it can sometimes be the easy way out, unless there was a much greater punishment waiting for him in the afterlife. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, guys. This was a really heavy one, and I appreciate you sticking with me through it. Go watch something a bit happier after this. If you found this case as important as I did, please give this video a big thumbs up, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe. Go check now. What are you doing watching without subscribing? Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the next video. And most importantly, if you ever feel that someone you know is being drawn into a strange, controlling group, please reach out to the authorities or a professional for help. It's a terrifying world out there, and staying vigilant can save lives. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, and I will see you in next week's video. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.